Welcome everybody. I believe everybody is in line now and we're ready to start. This is our second webinar, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Last time we looked at the Netherlands and the UK. This time we're going to be looking at Chile and Mexico. I'd just like to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be doing today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we have José, Ernesto, Amorós, Espinosa. He's the National Director of Doctoral Programs and the co-head of the Leadership and Entrepreneurship Research Group at EGADE Business School. He's a professor of entrepreneurship. And then we have Elvira, Elena Naranjo Priego. I hope the pronunciation is okay. And Elvira is a professor of entrepreneurship at the Instituto de Monterrey in Mexico. And thirdly, we have Maribel Guerrero, and she is from GEM, Chile. She's a research professor in business at the Universidad del Desarrollo in Chile. It's a Chilean private university. And I'll be moderating the conversation. My name is Aileen Ionescu-Somers, and I am the Executive Director of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. But we noticed that quite a lot of the people who have signed up for this webinar are actually not GEM members of the GEM consortium, which is absolutely great. It shows curiosity about the impacts on entrepreneurship of today's really unfortunate happenings around the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm going to explain a little bit what GEM is. If Forrest, is it possible for you to put up the slides? Just wait a moment. Okay, Forrest. Possible to put up the slides? Yeah. Thank you. So basically, GEM is a consortium of national country teams associating with academic institutions, as you've seen, through our panelists. And our financing partners are mostly governments, but not only. They would be also institutes and foundations interested in promoting entrepreneurship worldwide. And we are basically survey-based research. GEM is the only global research source that collects data directly from individual entrepreneurs, and that gives us some very precious data. We do this through two basic surveys: the Adult Population Survey, APS. It provides analysis on the characteristics, motivations, and ambitions of people who are starting businesses, as well as the social attitudes that are out there towards entrepreneurship. And secondly, we benchmark this against a national expert survey, which looks at the national context in which individuals start businesses. So this actually gives us a combination which makes our tools and our data very unique, benefiting numerous stakeholder groups. But again, as I say, governments that are looking to issue policies are very interested in our research. So the next slide, please. So GEM began in 1999. So we actually reached 21 years last year, and it's a joint project between Babson College and London Business School, and that's how it was founded. So we have 21 years of data, and just as an indication of how credible GEM is, GEM has surveyed over 3 million adults in 114 economies across the globe. So we have a lot to say about entrepreneurship. This means about 150,000 interviews per year. Last year, for example, 50 economies participated in our 2019 research. We work with hundreds of specialists and multiple academic and research institutions, as well as funding institutions. So that, in a nutshell, very quickly, is GEM. If we could have our next slide, please. So I'm going to just hand over to you, Ernesto. I know that you have worked in both contexts. You're in Mexico right now, you're an academic there, but you've also worked in Chile. And so it would be really interesting for you to bring us through a kind of compare and contrast overview on the impact and reactions of entrepreneurs in Chile and Mexico as a result of previous national disasters, because this is something that is prevalent in the region, especially in Chile, I think. So over to you to perhaps talk about that. Be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aileen, and thank you very much for all the people that are attending this webinar. It's a pleasure to stay with you today. And yes, as Aileen mentioned, it's very interesting to see how entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial dynamics is very relevant in many different contexts. One of the contexts is obviously related with external shocks. So the actual situation around COVID-19, the pandemic, it's obviously considered a huge external shock, probably the largest one that we are probably living in the last century, only compared with the pandemic at the beginning of the 20th century, the previous one, the flu, exactly. But as Aileen mentioned, in a specific context of Chile, one very or relative recent event, almost 10 years ago, it was a large earthquake. This large earthquake affect mainly the coast in Chile, and virtually isolate many communities, and obviously have a very, very strong negative externalities in different economic activities, included entrepreneurial ones. So as we can see in this figure, it's very interesting how we can measure using gem data the previous year of the earthquake, the year of the earthquake that is 2010, and the next one. And we normalize the average of the early stage entrepreneurial activity. That means people that is involved in the creation of a new firm in short term. That means between 0 to 3.5 years old, the firm. And we see in the blue line that the immediately effect of the earthquake in the average affected regions, that means the regions that have the more devastating zone after the earthquake, grow the average of early stage entrepreneurial activity. In the regions that was not affected, probably, for example, the main city, Santiago, very few affected regions, or in the north of Chile, also decrease a little bit the early stage entrepreneurial activity when we compare with the Chilean average, the whole country. The year after the earthquake returned to the normality, okay? But this is very important. What is the measures here? Entrepreneurial dynamics in many different contexts, using the example of Chile, react very quick to external shocks. And this is something that probably we will observe with the actual situation related with COVID-19 pandemic situation. Many entrepreneurs are reacting very, very quick to the actual situation. And in some sectors, in some activities, probably in many, many countries, we will see this effect about how entrepreneurs are reacting to the current situation. Even if we know that many economic activities are suffering the effects of the COVID or the coronavirus effects, it's very important to take in account entrepreneurial dynamics always react in a very positive way. And probably in many sectors, we will see this effect that is something that is important to take in account.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jose. I think what we will do a little later in the conversation is we'll go into how okay, there will be certain similarities, many similarities maybe, to this kind of disaster that you're talking about here, catastrophes or disasters. But what are the specificities of this particular crisis that make it a little bit different? But let's get to that later. Maribel, can I turn to you? And you are actually in Chile right now. So I'd love to hear from you about the factors impacting Chile in this current crisis. And also, I think you've had a very particular situation in terms of social movements just before the COVID-19 pandemic. And thirdly, I'd also be very interested to hear from you about differences between this, new entrepreneurial opportunities emanating from this crisis. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aileen, for inviting me to be part of this webinar. Well, I would like to mention before that over the last decade, Chile has been one of the faster growing economies in Latin America, and as well as has attracted many migrants from other countries like Venezuela. So the economy was relatively stable. For example, the level of unemployment reaches to 6 to 7% in this period. And also, if we can see in the GEM indicator, Forrest, can you please, exactly, thank you very much. The GEM indicator show, for example, positive trend in the perception of opportunities and as well as intention and as well as in the composition of the entrepreneurial activity that we are going to discuss later. But the main challenge in this process has been the transition from one entrepreneurial stage to the other one. Can we see the next slide, Forrest, please? Okay, thank you very much. In this case, for example, many nascent entrepreneurs are not able to transit from their projects, for example, into business and pay salaries. Something similar happens with the transition of new ventures into established firms. So here the main weakness has been the financial resources. If we focusing on the difference and similitudes between COVID-19 crisis and previous crises experienced in Chile, I would like to share with you 3 examples. The first one was the 2008 financial crisis. If we compare the impacts mentioned by Niels and Mark in the previous webinar, the effects in Chile were relatively different than in Spain, than in UK, and as well as in Netherlands. For example, of course, the economy fails around 1.6%, and as well as the employment rate increases to 10%. But for example, in this recession period, we can see in this slide that, for example, the increment in the number of nascents, and as well as the slight decrease in the number of established firms. So during the period from 2008 to 2010. So here the recovery action was basically the government intervention. So if we can, well, the second example was, as Ernesto explained, the Chile's February 27 earthquake was a very damaged disaster in Chile. So in Chile at that moment experienced the loss of human life, the fall of the economy, and the destruction of the property too. So after this event, new entrepreneurs emerged on the reconstruction of the country, especially for example, technological and social entrepreneurship. We also observe in this process that a significant change in the attitudes of the population, for example, in terms of collaboration, solidarity, resilience, and as well as an entrepreneurship trend. If we can see the trend of the nascent entrepreneurs after 2010, we can see the increment of after this event. Here, the recovery action was the collaboration between economic agents and the society too. So, and the last example that I would like to share with you is that before the COVID-19 pandemic, Chile, has other Latin American countries, experienced a social movement motivated by, for example, the higher levels of inequalities. It happens in the last quarter of 2019. So this social movement has led to billions in losses to private business and as well as public infrastructure. In particular, during this period, for example, the unemployment rate increased to 10%, and as well as, according with the Chambers of Commerce, the new business creation fell by 19%. So here the most interesting thing is like the support of this action has been the empathy and the solidarity of entrepreneurship associations, the non-profit organizations, and established firms, and as well as, for example, local developing agencies and as well as supply chain agents. All these actors are helping SMEs with mentoring, with legal support, and as well as crowdfunding opportunities, and as well as other type of initiatives. So here we can say that we learned 2 lessons. So the first one was the proactive role of entrepreneurship ecosystem agents and as well as the society in terms of improving, for example, regional capabilities, as Ernesto mentioned before. Here, GEM provides very useful information in order to, for example, diagnose gaps and as well as, for example, looking for smart specialization opportunities in specific regions. And the second learn was experience from programs, for example, like Startup Chile, and as well as there are another program that is the Digital Agenda Program. These programs have promoted, for example, the innovation and technologies. However, the digital transformation is still in process in many organizations, as well as, for example, the implementation of an innovative orientation. So this has been the experience regarding with the COVID-19 and the last recession regarding with the social movements. So back to you, Aileen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we turn to Elvira. Pretty much a similar question for you. What are the factors impacting Mexico in this crisis? And, you know, always, I think, in these crises, apart from the fact of what we know, and general research helps us to know what might happen, what are the more counterintuitive things that are actually likely to happen or are happening in Mexico right now? I'm thinking in terms of, you know, maybe new entrepreneurial opportunities, etc. Over to you, Elvira. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aileen. Well, first, I want to start like setting the context for Mexico, because in contrast, what's happening in Chile is that in Mexico, before this COVID crisis, we were already having a recession slowdown. So this can make that the effect of this crisis is going to be even harder than in 2009. In 2009, we have a decrease in GDP of 6.5%. Now we have the data of the first quarter of 2020 in Mexico, which is a negative 2.4. But this is going to be, it's the fifth consecutive quarter since we are having a slowdown. And we need to take into consideration that for this first quarter, we still don't have the effect of COVID in GDP. So estimations for this year impact in GDP can be from 3 to 9%, which will make this crisis bigger than in 2009. One of the important things here is that, which makes this crisis different from other countries, is that our informal sector is very, very important. It's almost 50% of all the economy. So what I want to show in this chart about
sorry, can I just ask you to define what you call formal, just for the sake of people who may not know what the difference is between formal and informal? It's quite an important distinction, I think, yeah.
Yes, sure. Well, for workers, that means that they do not have social benefits, they don't have health services, which also impacts this crisis. And for the firm, that implies that they are basically not registered for paying taxes.
Exactly. Yeah, okay, thank you. Go on.
Thank you. Well, in this chart, we are seeing the crisis of 2008, and in the same way that in Chile, this reflects an increase in opportunities and intention to start a business. This was an external crisis, but we can also see here two other small slowdowns for Mexico in the economy. That was around 2013 and 2017, and we can see the drop in perceived opportunities. The difference between these two more recent crises in Mexico that show a decrease in perceived opportunities and the international crisis in 2008, where we see the opposite, is that the domestic crises are more linked to some political factors also. So what it's very interesting here is that we can see with GEM data, which is the impact in this entrepreneurial intentions, if we have a crisis that is kind of coming from the external economy, and then we know that we can see opportunities to reconstruct the economy. But when we have crisis that comes from more related to our political cycle, because these lower peaks in that red line, they occur every 6 years. And that's pretty much related to our presidential elections. So we probably are seeing here that there is a lot of the role of the expectations for starting a business. And so like allow us to see the differences between all the prices, domestic and external, that we can have. Also, there are some differences here because how the crisis is impacting different types of business. With GEM, we do have this different sectors for business. So I think in this crisis, we're just impacting more services, because you can, if you're in retail, you can go online easily, but if you are in personal services, you cannot do that online. So there, we can say this using the GEM data about the business type, and also the role that Maribel also mentioned before, that what's going to be the impact in technology, because we're not yet a developed country, so we have some important part of the population which they do have some access to the internet, but it's not like enough, okay, not to actually move to online. So we do have some of the things like the recently trade agreement with US and Canada, that we have this free structure. So we need to expect to see what's going to happen here. Thank you, Aileen.
Hey, thanks, Elvira. I think maybe now is the time to actually tell you that you may start putting up, we're not finished yet with the presentations, but you can start putting up some of your questions on the Q&A part. If you just roll under your screen and you see Q&A. So what we would like is if you would put questions in the Q&A, and if you have comments, please ensure to put those in the chat area. This will just allow us to prioritize. You are about over 100 people right now, so, and you can also endorse a question rather than ask the same question twice, and that means that the question is catapulted up to the top of the question list, and we will address the most popular questions first. So feel free to put on your questions right now. But now I'd like to turn to Ernesto again. And the first part of this was really how do we use GEM data to diagnose the problem, you know, the knowledge that we have. But then we actually have a function of providing possible remedies, especially in the form of policy. And so, Ernesto, can you talk about current and potential policy remedies that could be put in place to avert the worst impacts in Mexico in particular? So, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The role, or the potential role of GEM research around to collect accurate information about the current situation is very, very relevant, or will be very, very relevant. We are in the process to start to collect data. So it's very relevant for different stakeholders, mainly for policymakers, understand the role of entrepreneurial sector independently of different industries. As we know, and it's obviously information that is rolling around, will be industrial sectors that will have a lot of problems, but will be other ones that could emerge, or the recombination about different activities will emerge with a lot of solutions for the current situation. So for first time in the modern history, we are living a crisis related with a pandemic disease in real time. So obviously entrepreneurs are reacting with this speed, putting together a lot of activities. Obviously, the potentiality to reshape a little bit some activities around the solution is very, very relevant. So our information about the individuals plus the information around entrepreneurship ecosystems, the characteristics of both the women and men that are currently doing interesting entrepreneurial activities, plus the information that is around the systemic conditions to enhance entrepreneurship, is completely relevant at this time. Obviously, policymakers need to adequate, depending the countries, obviously, the current situation. So it's curious to see some specific cases. Just for a very quick example, some very small mom and pop firms related with grocery stores in Mexico. Now, the current situation is very interesting to see how these small firms are doing a lot of things for the local communities, helping them in different ways. Not only selling groceries, but like a kind of hubs for regional development. So this is very important to see how we can react very quick in order, obviously, to protect our entrepreneurial sector, but also how we can learn for the current situation for the future. We are not exempt of future diseases, probably hope no, but these crises that certain sort of time emerge, we always see that entrepreneurs have a very quick reaction, and this is also very relevant to take in account, not only for policymakers, but also for the society in general. No?
Okay, thank you. And can I ask you, Maribel, to comment on the same thing, you know, in terms of policy remedies for Chile?
Thank you, Aileen. I would like also to mention, for example, that the reality of Latin American countries is quite different, for example, from European countries. In 2018, for example, the financial recession, the European Commission supported all the members, and probably in the COVID-19 crisis will help them too. Of course, cases like Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Greece take a lot of time to recovery. But during this event, Latin American represented a very good market opportunity for many European companies. In the case of Latin American region, for example, the Inter-American Developing Bank and other agencies like, well, provide similar support than European Commission, but maybe it's not enough to cover all the needs of all countries. And also, if we can see, like Elvira mentioned before, for example, in this COVID-19 pandemic, the highest percent of the European population has the blessing to stay at home for 1, 2, or maybe 3 months because they're working from home, they have the facilities to working from home, and as well as, for example, some of them receive, for example, unemployment benefits. In the case of Latin America, a stay at home at least 1 week maybe represent a sacrifice for the highest percentage of the population that earn the minimum wage. So in fact, according with the United Nations, the COVID-19 set to push at least 29 million of Latin Americans into poverty. So maybe in the next webinar, we are going to learn more about the case of Spain and Italy. But the reality is that, for example, the COVID-19 crisis represents a new adverse scenario for the global economy. In Chile, the current actions in terms of policy frameworks are, for example, as I mentioned before the COVID-19 crisis, the government adjusts the agenda for implementing reforms are also programs based on the social demands in terms of pensions, tax reforms, and other ones. So although these financial limitations, the government is implementing actions. Some actions are, for example, lines of credit for all firms in order to maintain the operations and also, for example, to pay salaries. And other action is like, for example, the reduction in the interest rate in order to promote, for example, the investment and as well as the consumption. Other example is the delay in the payment of taxes for the next 3 months, and as well as offering different options to pay taxes in the following months too, as well as also are covering, for example, all the public pandemic agenda related with taking care and as well as testing. And also one interesting action that the government is developing is the collaborating, for example, with financial organizations and as well as international agencies, but also is trying to reinforcing commercial cooperation with Asia at that moment. So unfortunately, there is not a recipe, and maybe the recovery is not only in hands of the government, but for example, it may be in hand of all the entrepreneurial ecosystem agents and as well as the society. And we have some example right now. For example, Financial organizations are offering, for example, credits and as well as delaying the pay of loans for the next following months. Of course, we also see that education organizations are supporting the developing, for example, of digital capabilities from different generational cohorts, and as well as developing, for example, the conversation with the society about the situation. For example, enterprises are making efforts in order to pay salaries to maintain operating the activities, and as well as, for example, to avoid unemployment and negotiate or renegotiate or collaborate with the supply chain. And as well as Ernesto also mentioned, they are also adapting their core activities based on the current necessities and of course the technological advances. But also we need to take in account that, for example, the customers in Chile are trying to buy in local products in order to help local SMEs too. And of course, for example, the employees are trying to transform themselves into digital workers. And also we have all other initiatives from no-profit organizations and professional infrastructure. So, well, these are some examples or some actions regarding COVID-19 in Chile. So back to you, Aileen.
Thank you. You know, maybe now is a good time for me to mention that one of the things that we are doing at GEM is over the next 6 months, we're going to be looking at what the policy remedies have been in the different countries with which we work. That will be about 50 to 60 countries. And we're going to be producing a policy impact report. It's a report that is sponsored by Shopify, whom you may know of. And so just to kind of give you a heads up that's a report that will be forthcoming in the fall. And that kind of brings us to the next question, which is, I mean, we've gone through quite an arduous process of agreeing on changing our questionnaire to make our questionnaires to make them COVID-19 specific, so that we can be as relevant as possible to this very exceptional set of circumstances that we are in today. So I'd like to ask you, Elvira, what are some of the questions that the GEM Mexico team will certainly be wanting to answer about COVID-19 impacts and remedies for this year?
Thank you, Aileen. Well, we discovered many things with this crisis. We discovered that small business, which is the most important part for the entrepreneurial sector in Mexico, they cannot survive for more than a month, because sales are dropping to zero basically for many of them. But we also discovered this that was also mentioned by Maribel, that this extremely positive response for the private sector trying to help each other. Okay, probably the situation with Mexico's policy, the government policy, has not been very fast to act to that. The private sector have been working a lot. So I think we can explore this kind of things at the GEM, and also have this. You know, this crisis was not like any other crisis, because it is kind of self-inflicted. Okay, because it's the government, it's us, which are staying at home, or we are ordered to stay at home. So it's kind of how we see as the population sees this crisis, that it's like coming from the inside for every country. But one of the most important things that I will be interested in studying, it's in the NSE, the National Expert Survey from GEM, because I think there are going to be many different impacts in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are going to see immediate impacts, which we are already seeing. They are already in place in many countries, but because we have new financial opportunities, new policies, new government.
Okay. Oh, I think Elvira is not with us for now. Can we actually go to you, Maribel? And can you perhaps frame some comment? You were part of the task force that actually reviewed the questionnaires. What specifically? Oh, I'm sorry, Elvira, you were interrupted there for a while. Can you wrap up very quickly there?
Yes, sure. In the medium to long run impacts in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we are going to see impacts in education, because all the generation already living education online, and then in infrastructure, the way we are going to move people, transportation, goods and products, the way markets are functioning, all these are going to be changes in the ecosystem, okay, in the medium to long run. And then later, in the long run, we are going to see the impact in the culture. For culture to change, it takes a little bit like a decade or more, but yes, we are going to see this is the beginning of a huge change in different ways of the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we know this, and we should be exploring this in the National Expert Survey.
Thank you very much for that. Very interesting. Maribel, can you continue, maybe give us a perspective from Mexico?
No, for Chile or from Mexico? Well,
well,
whatever.
From Chile,
okay.
yes. Okay.
Thank you very
from
much.
Chile, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Aileen. Well, we are living a new reality, it's true. And as GEM Chile team, we are expecting, for example, regarding with the National Expert Survey that Elvira mentioned before, we are particularly interested to know, for example, the perceptions and as well as the contribution of each of the experts that are going to be part of this survey. Not only in this COVID-19 recession, but also, for example, in the case of Chile regarding with the social movement recession too. But one of the interesting things for us is, for example, how the experts believe that, for example, we can recovery, or what are their expectations in terms of recovery. So it's something like, what is the next step after this situation? So regarding with for example, the adult population survey, we are particularly interested to know, for example, the dynamics of entrepreneurship, for example, during the two recessions. And as well as, for example, the entrepreneurial behavior, something that Elvira mentioned before, regarding, for example, how are the behaviors of the adult population, and as well as, for example, to identify potential, for example, entrepreneurial employees in that enterprises that are diversifying their core activities. And finally, for sure, the identification of new entrepreneurial trends in terms of, for example, technological, health, and social sectors like Ernesto mentioned before. Maybe they are collaborating together, maybe are, maybe are within the supply chain, or maybe with others. So maybe this is an interesting information that maybe we can capture at the sectoral level. So for now, for example, it's time to be collaborative and try to contribute as much as we can in terms of like as a professional and as well as a citizen. So thank you again, and back to you, Aileen.
Okay, thank you, Maribel. And again, I'm just going to ask people to put their questions in the Q&A and to vote for the questions by pressing on the thumbs up sign. We already have a prioritization here of questions. So Ernesto, I'll actually go to you this time and ask you, Mexico took the decision to address COVID-19 by focusing on saving the economy. Was that the best decision? What do you think of that question? And
yeah, there is a current debate here in Mexico about saving people and save the economy. So obviously the strong connection between these two factors it's very hard to have a quick solution about that. Obviously, every life is as much as relevant that other factors, even the economy. Obviously, as Maribel mentioned, the collateral effects to be at home, the people that can be, or the decrease of economic activities will cause a lot of problems. So we don't know exactly what will be the immediate effects for some sectors, even if we are now living a lot of problems, immediate problems. For any kind of activity. Virtually, there are very large firms that are completely closed, obviously medium, small ones, micro enterprises, individuals that are freelancers. All of us have problems in many, many activities. But again, the message here, it's important to how we can face this one and how we can react in the very short term. There is a lot of information that expect a kind of a quick rebound in the economic activities. We hope also so. Even will we take some time to recover the normality. Many activities need to retake the normality as in other countries start to emerge, mainly in Asia and some countries in Europe. Obviously, Latin America have a little more delay. The problem here is that we don't know exactly how many people is with the disease because the lack of tests, at least in the situation of Mexico. But in general, we try to prepare better for the future. Something that is very important to consider in terms of GEM research or the potentiality that GEM will give us is how the population will react. Probably, as we have in the screen, will be opportunity to take in account the new situation around some opportunities, some recombination that create additional opportunities in some industrial sectors, but probably we will face the growth of necessity-motivated entrepreneurs, no? Like the previous recession, at least in the case of Mexico, increased the necessity-based entrepreneurs, then decreased. In the case of Chile, was very flat. But probably it's important to see many people are losing their formal jobs, okay? But probably they will transform, they need to transform in entrepreneurs, but acting as entrepreneurs will be part of the solution in order to reactivate the economy. So this is something that we need to take in account and will be very, very important to see the dynamics of that. I strongly believe that will be a lot of opportunities, the recombination. Somebody put in the question and answer is opportunity to think about digital transformation. And we are not thinking about high tech, something that will be very simple to help a lot of SMEs to be a little more digital, okay? For example, the collaboration between the financial sector and the SMEs, the entrepreneurs, and not necessarily the banks, okay? It's a huge opportunity for fintech firms to collaborate with entrepreneurs in order to face or give a response to the current situation, okay? This is part of the digital transformation. Enhance the e-commerce in collaborative networks. Obviously, a small firm, a nascent entrepreneurs couldn't have a lot of resources to, I don't know, to create a huge e-commerce platform. But imagine the collaboration around 1,000 or 100 of different entrepreneurs working in a collaborative way. This is a potentiality that we have to do, and also is something that is very, very relevant. And taking in account this private-public collaboration, this is something that we need to think about more seriously in order to recover as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ernesto. I'll actually skip it down because we did dwell a little bit there on Mexico for a while. And just ask, how do you see job opportunities for those who just graduated and are currently searching for a job? And also, would a policy to regulate the informal sector help to increase entrepreneurial intentions, or would it reduce the intentions in the Latin American region? Who would like to take either one of those questions? Because they're more general.
Yeah. Yes, well, regarding our huge informal sector, we are expecting soon a fiscal reform. Okay, that's something as a country we have less tax revenues because of the structure of the country. So yes, we are waiting for a tax reform maybe next year or in the next 2 years. We also need some ways to attract this kind of business to formality. By now, the government is focusing on giving some help to this very small informal business. The government's giving the most important support it's giving now, it's a loan of $1,000. And that's a very small amount. It's $1,000 as a loan for this very, very small firm. So this can give us the idea of how big is the need for these firms. Then we have the more formal sector, more established firms. In some way, they do have some a better structure to deal with this crisis. But I think that what the government cannot do is choose who to help. We need to give some aid to both types of firms, all those informals which are suffering a lot from this crisis, but also the established firms. They do also have a lot of problems. They do have access to some formal loans that we cannot choose. We need to try to incorporate informal business, but that has been an issue for the last 20, 30 years in Mexico. So I don't think that happening very soon.
Okay, I'm skipping down a little bit to an interesting question here from Christina Theodoraki, who says, what are the impacts of COVID-19 in entrepreneurial ecosystem resilience? Research suggests to follow bottom-up logic and leave entrepreneurs and dynamics restore the stability of the ecosystem, as you suggested, Ernesto. So perhaps you'd like to take that question.
Yes, it's completely relevant to understand the dynamics of entrepreneurial ecosystems. At the end, we need to remember that entrepreneurship is a local phenomenon, okay? Yeah. Even if we can calculate something at national level that is completely relevant to have a quick shot about the dynamics of each country, entrepreneurship is very, very local, and the conditions will change, okay? Even in a relative homogeneous country, we can face different dynamics. And this is also very relevant in the case of Mexico. We are now living two different situations. In the north of the country, that is relative more richer in terms of economic activities, the states in the north of Mexico are facing completely different dynamics than the south of the country. So how we can measure that and integrate better is completely relevant in order to start these collaborations between different sectors in different ecosystems that operate locally. And again, this is something that we can do with GEM data, understanding these phenomena. And another message here is, and it's also related with some of the questions that emerged from the attendance, is probably we need also to rethink about to reconfigure some of our activities in order to be more local, as Maribel mentioned. And also it's a movement now that emerged in Mexico. And it's an opportunity for entrepreneurs. Think about local systems. Think about the last mile. Think about local producers that we can integrate with more value added to the global value chain. So, okay, is the notion to be global and locals, okay? That is also very, very relevant. Probably is the opportunity to rethink about these global value chains and try to add more value for some activities that probably only entrepreneurs can do it, okay? And we, in developing economies, have the opportunity to start to think about that, okay? And it is also something that we can see in the specific case of Chile in the last years with this growth of entrepreneurial sector, with more dynamics, with more value added, with more services, was a kind of miracle. Obviously, the collaboration between the private and the public sector was key in terms of the Chilean successful. We in Mexico expect something like that. Obviously, the political cycles don't help many in many ways with the current situation. But we again, I'm very, very positive about the entrepreneurs will have a key role in the recovery of our region.
Thanks, Ernesto. I mean, we've actually overrun our time, and I allowed us to do that because we still have nearly 100 people online. I'd like to actually ask Maribel, because next time we meet with our GEM consortium, it will be Spain and Italy. And Spain and Italy, of course, that's an interesting one because from a European standpoint, those were the two countries that were most hard hit by this COVID-19 crisis, although the UK is creeping up very quickly there, unfortunately. Maribel, would you be able to give some comment? Because you used to be with the GEM Spain team before going to Chile. And so I know you have some interesting observations to make in preparation for the next time in 2 weeks' time.
Well, thank you, Aileen. Well, of course, Spain has multiple regions, and of course, each region has the specific capabilities. Also has, for example, Ernesto mentioned, has Chile has, and I think that, for example, the impact, if we take in account the last recession that was in 2008 and all the time that they to recovery, there are some regions that, for example, has more capability to be adapted to this situation than others. And of course, maybe it's time also to, for example, to collaborate among all these regions in order to generate a very good ecosystem in order to support the entrepreneurs, and as well as, for example, try to solve the situation that is going to live in now. But of course, I know that, for example, GEM Spain now is collecting information regarding what is the current situation in Spain in terms of the perception of the entrepreneurs, and as well as how are they facing the situation. So maybe they are going to explain in detail in the next webinar regarding with all the information that they collected. So this is the point.
Okay, thank you very much for that little intro on Spain. We're looking forward in 2 weeks' time to actually go to Italy and Spain. You are effectively almost armchair travelers, you out there who are listening to us. I just wanted to say that if you are interested, if anything here got your interest, I can see from the number of questions that we got, there are a lot of people interested. We'll be keeping those questions and seeing how we can answer some of those in and through our research and through some of the reports that we've been talking about. But do feel free to contact us. The contacts are there in front of you on the screen. We are very interested in having new national teams. If you're interested in starting a national team in your country, just check on the website whether there is or there isn't a national team. We're very interested in having new ones because we need to go upwards of 50, and we therefore have more robust, more credible research. We're also very interested in having more sponsors interested in working with us on a whole multiplicity of levels. In 2 weeks' time, we will have a similar webinar involving representatives of our GEM consortium from Spain and Italy. And it remains for me to thank you very, very much for your involvement and for connecting with us today from your armchair. And thank you to Ernesto, Maribel, Elvira, and to the whole of the GEM Global team who are with us today, Kevin and Forrest and Chris, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.